Then the office.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I work within the Office of Research at the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences and for the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. I have been with Rutgers uh, more than 25 years, in this office about 13. And I have the opportunity to work with our faculty throughout the state and throughout the world, that work with and are affiliated with our school. So I have a lot of opportunities to see where people are getting their funding, seeing how everyone manages the change and the stress. But on average, our office sees about 50 million in new grants each year. That's new money, not continuations. We support just about 300 faculty members within the disciplines of School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. So definitely can see a range of things. And today, what I wanted to focus on is the learning objectives for today were to discuss and essentially how you would evaluate some of the government grant opportunities through an environmental lens, especially given what's going on, how to develop a compelling case for government investment, how to interpret and use evaluation scoring criteria to your advantage. I'm going to talk about quantifiable environmental indicators, as well as some of the unfortunate pitfalls that I often see with grants and how I've seen people survive with them. So right now, obviously, a lot of us are trying to figure out what our next steps are. But I will tell you, we're starting to get a little bit more promise, especially in terms of some of the changing direction. I know it's really hard when a lot of people feel that their fields are under attack. But I will tell you, where those opportunities go away, there's sometimes new opportunities to give you a chance to emerge in. But I will tell you, I know in general, a lot of the environment has been funds are still available. There are priorities. There's a lot of preferences on certain language, and I will tell you, but there have been newer expectations that have been put on any kind of climate-centered programs, and for a lot of groups, it's really a fight or flight situation. What I always try to encourage people to do is if there's a way to keep your programs open, even if it's on a smaller scale, it's much easier to ramp up if you still have even skeleton crews around to help you. There are opportunities that are coming through foundations and corporations, especially that I'm seeing, and that's how some organizations are going to have to survive for the time being. But I will tell you, a lot of people are scared. It is definitely the environment that I'm seeing, unfortunately. But like I said, I think there will be hope. I just think that there's some things that will need to be ironed out. But what we are seeing is, and obviously a lot of it, we're going to be watching January to see if the budget gets passed. But we are anticipating some areas, especially around energy and economic focus. From what I can tell, and again, this is what environmental fundraisers should tilt towards, is expanding the support for domestic energy production. There are investments for focused energy security, economic competitiveness, and national interest. So any proposals that seem to create jobs, have economic development, or energy reliability might be have a chance of surviving or potentially getting funded. What I'm also seeing is there seems to be a reduced emphasis on climate forward mandates. What that essentially means is we're not seeing as much emphasis on decarbonization, greenhouse gas mitigation, climate specific framing seems to not be available, at least from the federal perspective. And what we're seeing is some of those climate focused programs are being scaled back, merged, and sometimes reoriented. So there are ones that were originally funded originally and are still going, but at a different scale, and some of the words had to be changed. But there definitely has been some shifts with, especially with regard to environmental justice expectations. So EJ communities are definitely an area where we're seeing funding dry up. Those requirements are unfortunately now being reduced or removed from federal programs. And it definitely is making the states a little bit stronger because where the federal government is starting to close doors, there are state opportunities that are popping up. And it's certainly not of the same scale, but it is a way that some of the programs are surviving. But it really comes down to community engagement. And I know it's really tough, but it seems like there's still a preference for the community engagement. But obviously, we want to make sure if you're receiving federal funds, you're in federal compliance. There's also I've seen some opportunities come through for infrastructure, things to streamline permitting, which I know is really an interesting thing, especially for environmental organizations as well as land management. So, funds for rural infrastructure certainly are still surviving. There is some funding that I've seen for forestry management, wildlife prevention. Water infrastructure is something I don't see that going away in any way, but and traditional conservation programs are popping up. But there is efforts to streamline permitting. And again, I'm trying to keep this as careful as possible in terms of my education. But there has been, I would say, more of a preference for programs that have accountability, things that are cost effective and measurable outputs. So, what they want to see is there's an efficient use of federal funding, job creation, economic outcomes, and really practical on the ground results is what they're looking for. And again, ways to streamline regulatory compliance, strong project management, certainly seem to be getting funded at this time. And I know that's really hard because with the fundraisers, you're constantly in the throes of reinventing yourself. But I think if you kind of stick with economic infrastructure or land management priorities, I think you've got a good shot at getting some funding. Where I've seen people kind of take programs that have kind of been cast under one way and try to reinvent them. What we're seeing is practical environmental outcome programs are surviving, but ones that kind of weigh on the ideological climate framing, they're just we have to rethink them and reimagine them. But I will tell you, like I said, there's been quite a bit of emphasis in the workforce development. So what that essentially means is there might be opportunities there if there's ways to train people and help people get jobs, especially within the environment. It's not impossible. So they're looking at essentially problem solving, risk reduction, and operational readiness. And bringing jobs here to New Jersey and to the United States. But it is, one of those things where people are struggling. What I would tell you is, I think that the grant proposals that I've seen come through in terms of new awards, there's an emphasis on efficient use of federal dollars. I have seen people get funded for similar amounts, but very different budget, as such, the telling of their budget story. I will tell you, a lot of people are looking at the alignment of the agency missions. That is really an important thing. This isn't political. This is just to kind of get a sense of where they're going as an agency. And I think you're going to probably be seeing in the next several months, I would think we're going to see strategic plans for all of the federal agencies kind of roll out slowly. I know that's what they've been kind of working towards. And those are usually good about 4 to 5 years or so, just to kind of give you perspective. So at least you know what they're looking for, the kind of language, the vocabulary to be familiar with. But I will tell you, with these types of challenges, what I have encouraged our faculty and community partners to think about when you're writing your narrative and you're trying to think of how to carefully craft your program areas, especially ones that have not necessarily been under attack for quite a while, is what's the problem you're trying to solve? Why is government investment needed? What is the measurable benefit that taxpayers are going to receive as a result of working on this, or helping you support this? And if your narrative answers those questions clearly, I think you're actually putting yourself in a more competitive category. In terms of how to frame it for the environmental problems, what I'm seeing is a preference of using local data. Obviously, any kind of regulatory or economic impacts it seems to be getting through. Quantified risks, if you're able to reduce flooding, wildfires, erosion, water quality decline, or the cost of inaction, those seem to be going in a right direction. There still is, unfortunately, a suggestion to avoid climate language, which I know is really tough for environmental scientists and researchers. I will also tell you the national global rhetoric, I would suggest kind of avoiding it at this time. I think things will settle. They have in the past, but I do think that those are ones that are going to certainly point your proposal out. So in terms of what I can see, and I'm talking kind of a broader landscape, looking at the different grants that our faculty have been eligible for. EPA, we're hoping to see more money for water quality, compliance, and community health. With regard to USDA, we're definitely seeing grants that were for rural development get funded and restored. Forest and land management are still things that they're funding. Department of Energy has been interesting. That was definitely one that kind of surprised me, but they are looking at energy reliability, grid resilience, domestic energy production. I'm seeing for NOAA, coastal protection, hazard mitigation seems to be coming through so far. And the Department of Interior, definitely land stewardship and wildlife risk reduction. So what I would just kind of say is, obviously, as you think through your projects, you want to think through the agency's mission, not necessarily the advocacy agenda. Has anyone seen anything different for those agencies? No. It's not as quiet as people think. I will tell you that I am seeing awards come through, which is really a wonderful thing. They're just coming through a little bit slower, a little bit different. I will tell you what I've seen is some of the proposals that have been submitted prior to some of the changes. We had a chance to kind of rewrite certain portions of the proposal so that it wasn't sacrificed. It does make it very difficult, but I will tell you, having been grant funded for a very long time and been involved with grants for over 25 years, it's just a wave we have to ride right now. So I just encourage people not to give up their great ideas. I certainly think there will be space for science. And like I said, if you can kind of tether it to some of the suggestions that I have, you've got a very good shot at getting funded. Now, one of the things I also encourage people to think about is really flipping your proposal in a sense, because you want to demonstrate the need for the federal investment. It really comes down to investment. And I will tell you, your reasoning has to be kind of strong and consistent throughout your proposal. You want to make sure that your project is actually addressing any kind of problem or public consequences of an action. You want to show that you have a benefit that's essentially is beyond a single private entity. You want to make sure your costs are scalable, especially because some of the grants people go in for a certain dollar amount and they're not awarded that amount. So scalability is really important. If you have a grant where you've been funded and you've not been funded the full amount that you were supposed to get, I'd encourage you to revisit your scope of work as well to give them, you don't want to discount your work. So I would say, that's a chance if someone changes your dollars, you definitely should be changing your scope. And I think that that's what a federal sponsor would expect. I have seen people try to just keep as is, and they, unfortunately, they under budget their programs and they're going to suffer. I've seen quite a few community groups kind of going not thinking they had to change anything, and now they're struggling because cost of things have gone up. The other thing I would also say with, especially with the federal government shutting down and having that big disruption, I would be very, very careful if look at your timelines. If when you were, first applied for this funding, the timelines were going to work and something has changed, I would encourage you to have a conversation with the program officer because sometimes things are just not possible. I have seen some supplements come through, so that has given some people some hope. Things that certainly have cost a lot more with some of the tariffs. So people, are definitely seeing it's starting to hit their wallets differently now. But I would encourage you, if that's happening to your programs, have the conversation with your program officer. There are ways to get additional dollars to your program, and as long as you can justify, I have seen some opportunities there for supplements. I will also tell you in terms of the work that seems to be doing well on the national level is energy, infrastructure, and public safety. So another way that I've seen people be able to kind of continue the work that they were doing, but obviously calling it different things, is showing measurable and practical outcomes. That's just a way. Hi, Nancy. Thank you for joining us. Um, we have seen some federal decision markers for clear deliverables, like how many acres have been restored, how many habitats have been stabilized, what is the water quality improvement, what percentage. Community flood risk is still an issue for a lot of areas. Jobs created, retained, cost savings for local communities. I would say just be very careful when you do these types of promises to avoid vague promises. There definitely seems to be more. They want numbers. They want, if you're going to say increase or decrease, have a value that you're striving for. In terms of the other thing that I've also encouraged and I've seen some promising work has been building credibility through partnerships. So this would be, obviously these are things as nonprofits, a lot of you guys have to do anyway, but, making sure you're working with municipal partners, making sure if there's an opportunity to work with tribes or conservation districts, universities or technical partners, nonprofits with an implementation capacity, industry partners. I will tell you there seems to be a preference at the federal level for those types of things. So years ago, it was pretty clear that a lot of organizations could get their own grant. They are really suggesting partnership models. And unfortunately, sometimes the dollars don't change. It just, you have to figure out how to do it a little differently. But I will tell you, if you have projects that I call them shovel-ready projects, sponsors want to invest where the work can be done quickly, not where you're tied up in permits. So if there has been a struggle with getting permits secured or progressing, I will tell you those are the projects that are going to struggle with this currently with the federal mandates. If you have situations where land access has been confirmed or engineering or technical plans are underway, there's clear timelines, clear staffing, risk management measures. Those are the ones that seem to be doing much better than the ones that are going to take a little bit longer. I hope I'm not telling anything that's making people upset, but it's just kind of seeing, and I have a chance to work across the nation with other groups. So And what I would tell you is, your budget is obviously a really important piece, and mechanically it helps you do your work. But you have to make sure that what you're the numbers you're proposing tightly aligns with the activities that you're doing. And you want to show obviously that you're being responsible with the funds that you have, right? Cost effectiveness. If your organization has not had a good record in terms of reporting, if they've not had a good record in terms of spending, those are the positions and the organizations going to be most vulnerable right now. We want to make sure that we are avoiding any kind of unnecessary administrative inflation. I know that right now there seems to be potentially discussions about how they're going to look at indirect costs in general. So this may not be necessarily a huge issue for nonprofits because a lot of them take smaller amounts, but it's certainly going to affect your ability to work with universities. And then there's also, obviously, they want to reflect on realistic implementation costs, what it really does cost to do the work. What I found is the proposals that submit actual, even if it's quotes, seem to be getting funded over the ones that are just kind of speculating how much they think it might cost. But I will tell you, so to kind of give you an example so that, to kind of see what I'm talking about in terms of, an upgrade versus a vague fundable project, sometimes, and I've been a reviewer at the federal level for many, many years. So I'm just going to kind of share with you perspective. Sometimes projects leave a lot to be desired, and often what we hear are things like our project will significantly mitigate climate change while helping the community address environmental issues. Well, that's pretty open-ended, and I will tell you the projects that can anticipate a percentage, even if you don't make it, it's much better to put some numbers in there. And I would always say kind of it's important to think about whether you have the ability to kind of, I would say, not promise too much, but over deliver. That's what my suggestion would certainly be. So you want to have a project that, delineates how many acres of shoreline might be reduced. What are we talking in terms of the environmental issues? We're reducing sediment, by the river. We are trying to estimate 18% annually protecting, nearby wastewater infrastructure. What it would cost if there is damage, $4.2 million. So like the proposals that are dreaming in detail seem to be surviving in this current culture. The other thing I would also tell you is, it's important that you can consolidate your messaging as well, because I will tell you, I have seen some success with program managers, but a lot of them are looking for those sound bites. So I kind of challenge people to kind of share if they feel comfortable sharing in this format. Why should the federal government invest in your project? So when you are thinking about how you're going to write a proposal, putting yourself in the position of the reviewer and trying to say why would somebody want to invest in this particular area. I think it's really hard because obviously in some cases people are desperate, they need to keep their staff, they got to keep their program areas, communities are counting on them. But I will tell you, when it comes down to it, think of all taxpayers, right? Not just the ones in your district. People are paying for these resources and these program and opportunities. So I do actually recommend, if you don't have a chance to do it during today's presentation, your homework should definitely be thinking about, if you do go for federal funding, why should the federal government invest in your project, right? You should have an answer to that. I would also tell you, as I have in the past with a lot of other people that have gone for grants, you know, I look at the scoring criteria when I'm trying to figure out how to kind of divvy my time up on a funded proposal, when I'm trying to get funding for an area. I really try to figure out the point value of the different sections. And I think that's a really good strategy just in general. I teach grant writing at the university and have for many years. I will tell you the high scoring proposals often follow the rubric, right? And it's not assumptions. And interestingly enough, the way that you order the proposal, like following the request for proposal to a T, will definitely increase your likelihood of getting funded. Every section of your narrative should definitely map directly to the scoring elements, and a lot of people tend to overlook that. And what I mean by that is, obviously there are mandatory sections and then there's competitive sections within a proposal, right? And I think when you look at the back of a request for a proposal, there's often a rubric or scoring criteria. And I would tell you the highlight the points that add value to your proposal. With grants, there's often, by design, there's a repetitiveness, and it's a formula that's used, just so you know, in general. And I learned this because I took a lot of courses on how to be a federal reviewer. So it's really important that you kind of use that and translate each of the criteria into plain language, right? So everything's kind of driven off feasibility, right? When you propose a project to the federal government, grants are likely sometimes to have problems. I don't think any federal sponsor would ever tell you that they go off without any problems. But it really comes down to, do you have the right timeline? Do you have the right staffing? And are you ready to document all the work that's happening, whether it happens well or if there's a challenge or a problem? If you can follow this, this way of looking at your proposal, I think you've got a better shot at getting funded just in general. The other thing I would also tell you, so the way that I also organize my proposal just in general is I write each section as a direct response to the scoring prompt, right? And if I don't have a numeric value that I'm assigning, I look at it in order of how it appears within the outline of the section in which I'm replying. I look for using the language that's suggested by the funder, even if it's different than the language I would normally use. And that helps support any of the reviewers' questions and for clarity. I would also tell you it's really important to have measurable results, especially at least checkpoints within your project that are designed specifically to let us know that you know what you need to do to carry out the work and how you're going to measure success. And I will tell you, if you can do that, you're almost always better footing to be able to justify your budget. When people are not sure where you're going and there's I would say, people often get confused when they start to organize their proposal, an objective versus an output or an output versus an outcome. And I will tell you, if anyone's been a reviewer, they know what I'm talking about. Um, it's really important. They all mean different things, and sometimes, and within the proposal, you might feel like you're actually saying the same thing more than once, and that's by design. And I would tell people when they are approaching their proposal not to get frustrated, although it's very easy to feel that way when you're writing a proposal and there's a lot riding on you to make sure that there's jobs for other people or yourself. But I would tell you, be methodic, because when you're putting yourself in a much stronger position, because it's always the ones that you're not, where the ones you might get funded, and then you have to figure out a way to work with it. So I would tell you, every section should thread, there should be a clear picture of where you're going. I would spend more time on the capabilities of your program than what you've done in the past, just kind of in general for preference. And I would tell you, when I think in terms of quantifiable environmental indicators, what I would be looking for if I'm reviewing one of your proposals would be the measurable data points, right? So what I would want to see is, if you're trying to talk about some type of sustainable change, what will change, by how much, by when, how would you measure success? And if you followed those indicators, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for good reporting. If you don't follow those things, I have no idea where you're going to go with your proposal. I would also tell you is, if you're not hitting those checkpoints, it gives you a chance to potentially modify your contract on the post-award side if things aren't going the way that they should. In terms of why indicators matter in government grants, because really what it comes down to is it's whether or not your project is credible. It also means whether or not you're really ready to do this work. I think that it can demonstrate value for public investment if done well. And I think it also lends itself to accountability and report capacity. If you are missing those checkpoints, I think what happens is you might get funded and you might be lucky for that first round, but you're going to struggle to get this project done. And I would tell you, the proposals that I see that are getting funded definitely have clear plans. There's realistic expectations. I mean, we're looking at what's going on right now kind of universally, and there's tangible public benefits. The ones that are not, and the ones that have to go back and try to rethink this through, are struggling. Some of the proposals that I'm seeing. Um, I will tell you the other things that I would look out for, especially if you're looking for core of components for strong indicators. You want to make sure that you have a baseline. Whenever you're going to fix something, there should be a baseline of where you're starting from, right? So where things stand right now, what would be the expected change, like what you plan to improve, the time frame, which is the change in which it'll occur, leave enough time for yourself to actually fix things if something's not kind of launching the way that it should. And I would say measurement's really important, because if you have impact, that's your key to your next proposal, right? So you want to show how data is going to be collected, how data is going to be used. So the formula for this particular section would be your indicator would equal your baseline plus your expected change plus your time frame plus your measurement method. And that's essentially what you would be looking for in terms of a successful federal grant. So the other examples of quantifiable indicators, I want to give examples for areas that you might be interested in participating on this call. But for water and habitat, potentially looking at reducing nutrient runoff by 12% within 18 months. I don't know if that's achievable. Restore 25 acres of wetland habitat by year 2. Increase dissolved oxygen levels from 4.8 mg to 6.0 mg. Forestry land management, you want to think in terms of how many acres are overgrown, what you're doing to reduce any kind of wildfire risk. Maybe plant 10,000 native plants with a 75% survival rate over 12 months. Like whatever you can do to kind of show quantifiable indicators, I think you've got a good shot at getting funded and getting the full amount you want. In terms of energy and infrastructure, what I would suggest that you do is look for ways to improve efficiency, things that cost people money. If you can reduce, obviously, diesel fuel consumption, things like that, you'd want to quantify how many gallons per year would be, something that a sponsor would potentially be looking for. But when it comes to community and workforce environmental indicators, this is where I think your opportunities are just in general. If you aren't sure where your space is, there could, training people to work in communities is really important. And this is even for those communities that are being attacked, like the environmental justice communities. I think that there's still opportunities to get people jobs. There's, lots of ways that people can work within our environment. Training people, reducing household costs, protecting residents from recurring flood impacts. These are all things that affect communities. So where community indicators show public value, it's essential for federal investment. That's where they're going to want to put money right now. And I'll tell you in terms of, there's obviously a lot of tips for creating strong indicators. What I find is be very specific, not conceptual. You want to avoid terms like improve, enhance, support. You want to be very clear in what you're asking. Use numbers, use percentages, and have targets whenever possible. You also want to make sure that you ensure that the indicators align with the work plan and the budget you're proposing. Everything has to thread. And you want to be realistic. I think it's very dangerous when people use exaggerated claims, and I see them so many times in proposals, especially people are very optimistic, but they don't have the budget to support those activities. So that definitely becomes a challenge. Another piece of homework that I'd like you to think about today is definitely how you would write one measurable indicator for a project that you're looking to get funded. And again, using the formula that I had shared before, I definitely think it's something, that's kind of the framework in which that I'm seeing them, this particular administration look at. So it's indicator equals baseline plus expected change plus time frame plus measurement method. And I'll tell you, in terms of the pitfalls that I am actually seeing, you know, you have to have evidence-driven statistics. You want to align with the agency mission, and as I had mentioned previously, you want to focus on public benefits, measurable, be practical, be realistic with the money that you have. I think you want to economically justify your ask. If it's worth the points, it's worth the space in your proposal. And I would say if there are no points assigned, please try to keep those sections brief for your reviewers. And I would just tell you what I've done to kind of figure out what's going on in the landscape is I'm trying to stay in the know, right? So I look at regulatory monitoring and best practices to figure out what my next steps are going to be. I subscribe to the Office of Management and Budgets and the U.S. Government Accountability Office and grants.gov updates to kind of see what the pulse is. I had a strategy of joining at least one national compliance listserv each year. I would also suggest that you review the funding notices for monthly changes. Things are definitely changing. And if we are going to another shutdown, which I don't know whether or not we would be, just know that grants.gov would probably still remain open as it had with the previous shutdown. And make sure that staff are trained to kind of handle federal compliance updates. Even if you had a grant that closes out, you could still be responsible for federal compliance even up to 7 years beyond the scope of your funding. So it's really important to have an idea of what those responsibilities are. And as we kind of close and open up the floor for questions, I want you to also think about, one of the things that you could take away from today's session, what steps you might take when you go back to your organization or the questions you might still have. I want to open the opportunity to entertain questions if people would like to ask me questions. So the floor is now yours. Denise, did you want to ask a question?
Actually, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of information. And although I tend to write most of the grants through our nonprofit, but also for the Park Commission, there are a couple of other staff people who apply for grants as well through either the state government or we don't do as many federal ones, I think just because of the volume of work
Mm-hmm.
that has
They
to go
come with
into it.
lots of keys. That's what I
Yeah.
said. It's like going to a hotel with 5 keys.
Yeah, exactly. But but I think it's really important because one of the things that's always challenging for us is being a park system, we can embark on a project, but we then don't have connection to the people who are benefiting from that project. We do something in the park, we go back to our office, all the visitors are at the park or whatever, and we don't have that connection. And so I think it's important for our staff to start thinking about ways to make those connections.
And the
Even
way
if
that you could
it's,
do is through focus groups. So if you're willing to do some intercept surveys and find out who visited your park and then follow up with
Mhm.
them, I always build in my grants incentives when I can to pay people for their opinions, their feedback, to help me make sure that the programs and projects that we develop are responsive to the community needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that we have to get better at, or even just collecting the stories, through a survey or something
Hmm.
like that, because that's always the hardest with some of the grants we have is really what the outcomes and the outputs are. That's
And there,
always
there is a
important.
difference. And I think I will tell you what I'm noticing. People are panicking. So things are starting to get jumbled.
Mm.
Just from an organization perspective, people are getting desperate and they're putting a lot of shots on goal. And sometimes these shots don't have a chance of getting funded because people are not reading the directions as they once had because they're panicked for funding. So they desperate times are desperate measures. And I would just say to people, keep steady, keep your hands steady. It's really hard, but I always say it's very similar if you have the care of a young child. If there's a young child in your responsible world, like thinking about how you can keep calm for them is really, and you want your proposal to read the same way. So you might be panicking because you might be laying off people, but you really want to demonstrate confidence. You want to demonstrate that you're going to be resilient. You're going to be able to get through this. You might have to think differently, and you might have to be ready to ask for things you never had to really ask for before because it's not coming from other locations. So
Mhm.
that's been my strategy. Did anyone else want to chime in? Lynn, did you want to
I
say anything?
literally just, I'm so sorry for being late.
That's
I,
okay.
I was
That's a
working on a grant.
okay. Federal grant or state grant or
No, no, actually a state grant. Yeah.
okay, okay. They're not going away either.
Okay.
And
Let
I'll
me
tell you,
close this door so I can hear you guys
sure.
better.
And federal grants aren't either. So I want people to know while program areas might change and things might feel like they're under the attack, where there's one thing that's closing, there'll be other doors and windows opening. So be patient, know what you want to do, know your space specifically, because I will tell you, and I always tell, I work with groups all the time and they're always trying to figure out how to reinvent themselves. I'm like, where are you in this world, in this ecosystem? Where do you want to be? And I got one group to commit to, we're the last mile. So I'm like, that's a great place to be, right? Like we are delivering to the people, right? Knowing where you are in the ecosystem allows you to position yourself. If you try to do too many things, your proposals read that same way, and we have no idea what you're trying to do. So be very intentional, be very methodic, be really good at basic math because that's what budgeting is.
Mhm.
Because I think what often people do is they bloat certain sections, and a trained reviewer is going to see right through it. I mean, I can cut through that. I always say the cut through the garbage real quick, because if you're asking for certain dollar amounts, you should be able to do that with the work you're proposing. And if it's inflated, then I stop reading your proposal.
Mhm.
Julia doesn't know what to make of me.
No, no, no. I'm thinking of actually a time when I was still at the Great Swan Watershed Association when we got a federal grant, and I felt like I needed to employ somebody just to report on the grant.
And that's okay. That's a good place. But I'll tell you, it's easier to report if you actually design the project. Otherwise, you're just kind of mechanically cleaning up someone else's mess. I said, like, think about like Disney World and the people that clean up after the horses. If you are brought into a project that you didn't dream up and you have the responsibility of cleaning up, that's how you feel. It's really hard. And I will tell you, it's very hard to clean up other people's ideas. I was somebody who had to clean up quite a few. So, coming from a place of experience and a passion. But I will tell you, and that's why I think it's really important when you have a staff training them to not only just handle mechanically what you need them to, but have a bigger picture in mind, because they might be seeing something you're missing, something very big, and some of those are opportunities. But I know nonprofit organizations often like everybody handles everything because that's how they survive, right? I say shoestring budgets, real small group of people, and we run at everything. But cross training is a really good thing, especially right now, especially I would say with the turnover that's going on in the federal government, turnover is happening at the state level. There's lots of people changing positions, and if you can keep people, I would say keep them educated, keep them involved. they've got a very good chance of having a very committed workforce. And I think that there are opportunities to continue to grow them professionally. And that way you're not constantly retraining the next batch of people that come through your organization. Laura, did you want to add anything?
Since we have a little bit of time, did you want to shed light on your experience as a grant reviewer? And were you also an evaluator as well?
I've been an evaluator. I've been a program manager. I've been compliance. I've done a lot of different roles. Now I get to help people, so it's a much more fulfilling role in life. But I've been involved. I started working grants in 1999, so I've been around for some time. And obviously the way we submit grants is very different than how I was originally trained. I thought it was very normal to jump in the car and drive my grant to DC. I thought that's just what everybody did. And then I quickly realized, wow, like we just really ran the clock on just about every proposal we ever did. But I will tell you, so when I first started in the 90s, I was actually supporting grants. I was originally, I was a proofreader, page counter. I know it sounds really impressive. And then you're like, why is she here talking to us? And then I gradually took on more responsibility. I took on program areas, managed, essentially things that I didn't create, but I got to clean up. And then created my own programming areas. So, and now I have the opportunity, I get to work with all the faculty here at the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences in 21 counties to help them think through the changes, think through the times, and stay relevant. And where I get very excited for people, especially given my life cycle, is I've seen this happen before. I know that some people are acting like this is just such an insult, but things happen, things change. And I think what I always looked at as an opportunity to kind of reinvent myself. Like, Cher's been around a long time. How many times has she reinvented herself? I kind of like to think of my grants as the opportunity to do that too, because not every idea that I've had funded has been a great idea. Sometimes it's just great enough just to get it funded, and sometimes I'm glad when it goes away. Like, but because those are the grants that are typically written under duress, or you've got to keep people funded. So you're like, I'll go for anything. And those are very dangerous spots for people. So I will tell you, as a reviewer that's done this a long time, I can see right through it. I can see when you're really desperate and this is not what you want to do. It actually pops right off the page because there's no personality at all in the grant. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting stuck doing this on Memorial Day weekend. Like I can see where you're sitting. I can imagine what you're going through. I'm like, wow, they don't want to do this either. And it will come out the first 3 paragraphs, whether you're excited about what you're doing. Isn't that scary? I feel like it's because I had so many of them myself. I know what to look for. But I will tell you, reviewers, if you don't seem organized, a grant's not going to help you get organized at all. It's actually going to be a really big detriment to your organization. And that's why things left, there's a lot of times where people give money back because they can't do what they said they were going to. Or they get really lost and confused in their own words. I'm like, well, if it doesn't make sense to you, no one else can help you understand or interpret what you have going on here. What I would tell you as a reviewer is one of the things that if you get as far as you did the administrative portion, right? So 12-point font, 1-inch margins, whatever the criteria is we're looking at administratively, I actually use a logic model template to figure out if I can map out what you're doing within your program. So I'll start a very blank, like a logic model template, even if you don't have to provide one, to figure out if you got the right sections or if there's things missing. And I can do that. And then if I'm missing like your outputs, your outcomes, or you don't know the difference, I'm like, oh, that's probably not a competitive one. So I put you in another pile. I also share with people when I'm one that gives reviewer feedback, which a lot of people do not. If you don't get funded, it's okay to ask for that, by the way. Sometimes they don't have the capacity to give it to you, but get in the habit of asking for it. And then if they give you something you can work with, they demonstrate that this is why this section didn't quite work, resubmit it a year later and see if you got a better chance. They'll get so sick of you, like might just give you money to go away. But I will tell you, I've had grants where I feel like they were just trying to get rid of me, which is fine. I'll take the money. But sometimes, and it's hard if you're writing in your own reviewer, it's very dangerous. Even if you think you know what you're doing, the mistakes are going to carry throughout the proposal sometimes, and you're just going to miss them. I don't know if anyone's written them and you're like, okay, and I would tell you the other thing I also do is I keep copies of everything I've ever written just to see how I've grown as a professional. And sometimes newsletter writing is very different than grant writing, right? And a lot of people don't know the difference, and it reads that way. for a grant to be competitive, you have to have metrics. You have to have checkpoints. You have to anticipate things not going well. And if you don't think you're going to make mistakes, you're like, go for gifts because they're much more forgiving. If you're going to go for grants, just know that these are things that are very difficult, and your sponsors are expecting there to be things that we find like unexpected outcomes, things that we weren't quite prepared for, but that happened anyway. And I will tell you, they're going to be very forgiving if you own up to what you did or what you didn't write up or something you might have missed, because there's something to be learned by your mistakes. I know people feel very vulnerable when there are mistakes out there. It's better that you find it in the programming part because you can still kind of change course. If it's found 7 years after you close, like it's really hard, and sometimes organizations have to pay money back because of those mistakes. So I will tell you, if it's something that's interesting enough that it's taken time above and beyond your normal week, I think I'd talk about it in my grant reporting.
You said that if you're turned down, ask for a project review to see where you went wrong or what you were missing.
I do. Yeah.
Do you do this the opposite? If you are succeeded, do you ask for a review to find out where you did things right?
I have, as you know, and I will tell you, I build my relationships with my sponsors. I'm a little bit, they become friends for life, whether they know they're going to be or not, because I make myself available. Now, a lot of people get very nervous when their sponsors are hanging around, and I don't think you should be. Their success is tied to your success. And a lot of people just think that they kind of sit in this tower and they're not like just there to make things miserable or, maybe approve things every once in a while. They're really there in partnership. And one of the things I always do, and this may sound crazy, but I do a take your administrator workday when they will allow me to. I bring them into the field. I let them get dirty. I let them see the programming that I'm doing. Because number one, it's a day out of the office, and most of them are willing to go, and they will jump through hoops to get to the where the work's being done. But it also shows them that I respect their time and I'm not afraid of them. So, and I think when I do that, what I find is people will come back and they'll give me more funding because they know that I'm very open about, areas where I think there could be other opportunities. And when I have them in the car, it makes it sound like a hostage situation, but when I have them in the
it is absolutely, they can't get out, but
they
you
can't get
got
out. They got me
there.
and I'm driving them and we can go anywhere. What I find is that they will share with me what the next calls might look like. And they've given me some really good perspectives. So while we've been, stuck in traffic, and sometimes I take longer routes intentionally, but not because I know how to get places, just because I want to show them, that it takes a long time to get to this site. So that's why I ask for so much travel money, or that's, so I really, it's very intentional. And I have had a lot of sponsors come back and I'd say, I've got more money because someone else didn't do what they were supposed to do. Is there anything you could put in front of me for $100,000? Or I've got another $50,000. And the answer is yes. And then I get off the phone and say, what did I just say yes to? And then I got to figure out what I just said yes to. So I will tell you, I'm not afraid of them, but I will tell you, I will price out the work appropriately because I've learned the hard way, especially my environmental projects were probably the hardest learn that I had to have. I had a project and it was funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'm sure if you talk to some people at Rutgers, they would tell you this is an interesting project. We traditionally those grants do not get funded for the amount you ask for. That has been mostly my experience. And I went in for a grant that was valued at over 100,000, and we got 80. And I did not revise my scope because I was just so excited to get money and be able to keep my job another couple of months. So I just kind of said yes. And then I said yes to something that just had bad bones from the beginning, not the agency, but just my poor planning or what, I don't know what was going on. But it was a project that just like the never ending story, like everything that could go wrong in my project just seemed to continue to go on. And I got to the point where I ran out of some money, right? Because I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to do this project 2 hours away from where my office was. And I got to the point where I had to figure out my labor because I had to put in 80 trees. So, and if anyone's ever dug and put trees in the ground, it's not easy to do. Okay, so these aren't ideas you come up with on Memorial Day weekend. But I did, unfortunately, and this was mine. This was my project, and I ended up calling. You're gonna love this. I called the Department of Corrections and said, "Does anybody want a day out of the office? I need a lot of help." And I did. I teamed up. Thank God that's the only thing that saved this project. But we were building on a landfill. Not again, a great idea from an air conditioned office, bad idea in the middle of July. But we got it done, and they were a great workforce pool. They're strong. All I had to do was I fed them. They were very happy to have some good food. I was happy to get this project done, check it off my list, and I'm thinking to myself, never again. If I get reduced on a budget, then we're reducing the scope of work. So I learned a lot, but it did get done and it didn't come back to bite me. So the good news is I got, that one was fine. But these ideas, I would say drive around when you're writing these wonderful proposals, see if you can really do this. Like think about the people that are going to make your life hard with permitting, like, and really make sure whatever you're proposing is something within scope and an opportunity for you and it's not going to drive everyone else crazy. Because even if it's terrible and people start to jump off the ship, you're still stuck on it and you have to figure out how you're going to wrap this up. So I'm a big fan of if it was a bad idea, it's okay to put that in the file, just like not the file that it would go to the sponsor, like an internal file, like what was I thinking? I have a folder like that on in my file cabinet, like what on earth was I thinking? And I think that being honest, and then also when I've had partners burn me on projects, which I've had some experience with that, I'm very honest with how I'll work with somebody again. Like you burn me once and I go back, then I have to be very intentional with how we work together again. I think where people have hurt me on my projects is I just trust that people say they're gonna do what they say they're gonna do. And that's, I mean, I think it's a good way to live your life in general, but not good on projects if you have things that have to get done. Some people are like they run away when the work has to get done, or like they're there for the press release, they get their picture taken, then we don't see them again. So and everyone's laughing because they can all identify with what I just said, but they're like afraid to say, yep, I understand that. I mean, I've seen pictures of people. I'm like, I've never seen this person at a project say, why are they in this picture? Like they did nothing. But it is really hard. And I will tell you with a lot of organizations, they feel compelled to say yes to a lot of things that don't make sense for their organization. And I've gotten better and it's really hard. I've been getting better at saying, no, not right now, but maybe in the future. And that's my way of saying, okay, we probably not in this reality, but at some point maybe we can find a way to work together. Because it takes a lot to kind of build those things and those efficiencies. And when you're trying to save your money for the work you got to do, bring someone else along for the ride and the credit isn't always the best thing for your organization. So I hope that today was helpful. Does anyone else have any other questions for me?
I'm just
You
so
didn't expect
sorry
that
that I
today,
came
did you?
late. I apologize
That's
profusely.
that's
I
okay.
obviously missed something really great. So
Okay, well, we can
It's
send you
all being recorded.
it's being recorded, right? And I didn't say anything too bad today, right? I'm just kidding.
No.
But no, and you're welcome to have a set of the slides as well. And that's my contact information. The cell phone belongs to me personally if you have any questions or problems.
appreciate it.
And I'm excited, for the opportunity to work together. I know that Lauren, I think you found me at a course that I was teaching for the state of New Jersey. I think was it the Treasury? Okay. So